Okay, so I'm going to talk about research, planning, monitoring, and implementation in the ISR. Some drum dancing. Can you switch now? First, I'll talk a little bit about the Inuvialuit final agreement, give you a little snapshot of the corporate structure, some of the goals of the regional corporation programs, and then some specific research we've worked on. Okay. So some key points with the IFA. It was signed in '84, and there's of course land and money associated with that, and rights, and basically IRC is carrying those terms out. Next one. Like most agreements, it's to preserve the Inuvialuit culture, identity, and values in the changing society. To enable Inuvialuit to be equal and meaningful partners and participants in the northern and national economy, and to protect and preserve the environment. There's a little snapshot of the corporate structure. That's IRC in the middle there, and a number of corporations below. Above are the 6 communities in the Inuvialuit settlement region: Aklavik, Inuvik, Politek, Sax Harbor, Tuktoyaktuk, and Wilhaktuk, which used to be called Holman Island. Next. At IDC, 100% it's Aboriginal owned, and the sole shareholder is IRC. And they are owners, partners in a number of ventures and investments in over 20 companies. And basically IDC secures financial and long-term benefits for the beneficiaries. Next. These are just some of the goals of the organization I work for, excuse me, to preserve and grow the financial compensation flowing from the IFA, and to identify and sort of produce Inuvialuit specific programs that fit to their economic, social, cultural, and educational requests or needs. Now a little bit about the research. I thought it was interesting to hear Pertiz talk about that the social science research, the amount that was being done in the Arctic. We don't really feel that that's true, and maybe it's the subject matter of the social science research, but we tend to feel it's quite underfunded and not the focus. It's not like the sexy topic, polar bears and permafrost. And the Inuvialuit struggle with huge social, economic, and cultural, you can press the couple times, issues like, of course, food security, housing, employment, and poverty is quite evident in some of the more isolated communities. So it's important, I think, to be mindful of the history of research in the North. Typically it's done by Southerners, and typically it's done sort of an in and out type situation, and historically most researchers wouldn't come back and share the data, let alone even involve people in the research. And of course, you know, there's hugely different worldviews if you live there versus whether you visit there. And this can reduce the benefits of research. Bing, bing, bing. Research often is done that's not relevant to communities. It's not sort of on their agenda in terms of something that's important that they want further data on. Research often gets reduced with a name that's going to cause some progression, some positive change, and knowledge transfer. So in order to deal with these issues, IRC decided to develop their own research policy and agenda. This is in order to coordinate and direct research in the ISR. So when researchers come up and they want, you know, I guess letters of support, we're all for that, but we're also looking at how we can work together and how both parties can get some of their needs met, some of their agendas on the table. We're also using this to encourage and prioritize research. There's a lot of research that goes on in the communities, and often there is research on similar topics over and over again, so it's kind of important that I think that's looked at and organized a bit, and maybe even connect researchers together a bit more, so there's not that research exhaustion that happens in the communities. And of course, the important thing about doing the research and directing the research is to get some of information so that the communities can plan programs and make policy suggestions. So some of the critical areas are, of course, environmental, social, cultural, and economic of resource development. We need to get baseline data, and we're working on that. Also, another priority is sustainable community-based economies. We don't really know what it takes for a community to be sustainable. There's a lot of dependence on outside resources. Next one. Impacts of government policies on sustainable development and culture. Right now we're working on the effects of government social policies on the communities. Specifically, we're looked at housing, mental health and addictions, income support, and education. And of course, like everyone else, the housing turned up the same things everyone's been talking about. It's a bit of a nightmare system up north. As well, specific social and health determinants to achieve sustainable communities. Okay, this next slide is way too much. But basically, again, sort of a draft agenda, looking at impacts, sustainable economies, government policies, their impacts on culture, health determinants, policy directions we're going to try to be influencing, and meaningful participation in regulatory agencies, industry and other stakeholders like Beaufort Regional Environmental Assessment and IOMP, Integrated Ocean Management. Read what the P is for. Next. So specific ones we're working on with the Arctic Council, specifically a social indicator working group case study. We're looking at the social impacts of hydrocarbon exploration in the Nunavut community that happened between a certain amount of time during a boom period. And we're utilizing an existing established project we already have called the Nunavut Indicators Project, which I'll show you later. We've also completed mental health and addictions study. And like I said, we're in the middle of a social policy study. And next week I'm going to be flying to Paulatuck to work with the Community Corps on developing a survey that we're going to do for every household in Paulatuck, talking about how much money goes into running a community home, how much of that is money, how much of it is subsistence, harvesting, etc. BRIA we're involved with, and ArcticNet. Of course, we're in the IRC 1 area, and we've been attending a number of meetings on that, and hopefully we'll be talking to some of the academic leads for some of those socio-cultural economic subject areas, so that we can help, we can remind people what the Nunavut concerns are, so when they make their policy recommendations, they'll at least have that in mind. So specifically, how am I doing for time? Am I talking too quickly?
No, minute.
Okay, I'll breathe now. Okay, so specifically, I'll talk about 3 projects. Mental health and addiction study, the TUC pilot project, which was a spin-off of the mental health addiction study, and then the Nunavut Indicators project, and I'll be quick. So as we know, substance misuse has been a problem in the Beaufort Delta region, ISR specifically, for a number of years. Leaders and community people have been talking about it for a long time, and there's various reasons we understand how that came to be. And but the important thing is it's had significant effects on people, families, and communities. So the IRC has made some considerable efforts into trying to figure out how to provide services where they're culturally appropriate and really what the communities want. There seems to be a homogenous way that the NWT puts all services on the Northwest Territories, which is not obviously going to work for everybody. So in our study, we interviewed over 200 people, went to all the ISR communities, and this is one of the slides we took back to the communities. When we do our research, we always go right back, and we're very visual with the information. We also use the radio a lot. So we talked to over 200 people individually, with interviews that went anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours. People were very glad to talk about what they wanted for support services and what they didn't want, what was working, etc. One of the interesting things that came up is, obviously there was mental health and addictions issues, but there was huge issues around that, and that was a number of different government policy, struggles that were spin off because of the policies, which is why I went into that other research. People talked about the two main reasons that they would engage in addictive behaviors or use addictive substances would be stress. And stress was always related to things like housing, lack of housing, about to be evicted, having a debt of $90,000 and homeless and no job and 4 kids and, huge reasons, being hungry. The other issue that promoted people to sort of engage in addictive behavior was that it was always in their environment. Of course, that goes back to housing, people being crowded, not having another place to go to. Most of the communities didn't have a drop-in center, and that was one of the major things as identified by all the communities. They wanted a place to go, not necessarily a clinically therapeutic place, but a place where they could get peer support, go for a coffee, maybe get some information, as another option than maybe doing something that wasn't particularly healthy. And then they identified a number of other things in terms of services, wanting access to detox, which you don't currently have in the NWT. A number of people go out on the land to detox, which of course isn't safe and might speak to a number of the drownings that happen. So we then went to sort of implementing some of the findings of the Mental Health and Addictions Project. Specifically, we focused on TUC because they had done a lot of work in the community, getting people's feedback and ideas of what they wanted. And we got additional funding from the GNWT to do a pilot project there, basically to try out some of the ideas that people had identified. And we're just completing the second year of that, second and last year of funding. Next, planning. So with the Mental Health Addictions Report and the pilot project, we continue to further figure out the gaps in services and develop appropriate services specific to each community, because there's quite varied differences between each community. One of our exciting monitoring projects is the Nunavut Indicators Project, which is www.nunavutindicators.com. You can all access it right now if you've got wireless. It's been developed over the last 4 years. We basically have a data sharing agreement with the Bureau of Stats, NWT, and we upload every year some of the stats, and we can separate Nunavut specific statistics, compare it to the region, the territory, and the country. And this database is to basically measure how the Nunavut final agreement goals are being achieved or not, to determine obviously social and cultural economic impacts from resource development, so sort of baseline, and to monitor how the government's doing to improve conditions. That's what the website looks like, and the top row there's little pull-down menus. It's quite easy to use. Next slide. There's an example, click again, of a cultural indicator. And on the bottom it's got, of course, the timeline, and then the different colors are the different communities. And you can see sort of the effects of when there's industry, there's less consumption of country food, and when there's bad times, usually people are on the land a lot more in terms of not being involved in the economy. The next one, another example of employment income. The top 3 are Canada, Northwest Territories, and the Nunavut region. And the bottom 3 are TUC, Ulahak-TUC, and Paulatuck. And of course, income is going down. Very quickly, So basically, we've worked on our policy and agenda, and we're looking at establishing certain monitoring tools next. We're involved with the ArcticNet, and like I mentioned, the BRIA and IOMP, working on social cultural work plans with them. Next one, and that just lists what I've already said, blah, blah, blah. So, key messages. We're open for business, for research partnerships, but we really encourage people to come to the region to discuss with communities and leadership the research idea, to sort of collaborate so that the research can be meaningful to both, and both can sort of have some goals met. So I believe some of the questions were, what are the key issues, challenges facing the social economy in the North? We just identified distance from markets, money, of course capacity, staff turnover, all that's huge, everyone knows that. And often the government regulations. When there's a call for proposals, there's a certain spin you got to put on all your proposals, and it's a bit of a pain in the ass because sometimes you're faking it, but you do what you do and you get creative. Anyways, and how can nonprofits and other social economy groups improve operations? I think obviously to make sure we're continuing to fill a need, and I think that was it.